I used to think being quiet and agreeable would eventually make people treat me better. But the moment I realized how little I actually mattered to my own family still hurts when I think about it. That realization didn't come during a fight or some dramatic argument. It came during a dinner where no one noticed I had stopped talking at all. My name is Emily Harper. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how I spent most of my life shrinking myself for others, until standing up for myself finally changed everything. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. On the outside, my family looked normal. My dad, Mark, worked in logistics. My mom, Linda, was a nurse. My younger brother, Jason, was the center of attention from the moment he was born. He was louder, more confident, and somehow always needed more help than I did. From a young age, I learned to stay out of the way. Whenever there was a decision to be made, Jason's needs came first. What school activities fit his schedule? What vacations he'd enjoy? What sacrifices were necessary for him to succeed? I told myself it made sense. He struggled more, they said. He needed extra support. I didn't want to be selfish. By the time I reached my 20s, that dynamic hadn't changed. I had moved back home temporarily after college to save money while working an entry-level marketing job. Jason still lived there too, even though he was 3 years younger than me. The difference was, no one expected him to contribute. I paid rent. I bought groceries. I helped with bills. Jason didn't. At first I kept quiet. I didn't want to cause tension. I figured if I proved I was responsible, things would balance out eventually. But small moments started piling up. My parents would forget my work deadlines but rearrange entire weekends around Jason's plans. They'd interrupt me mid-sentence but lean in when he spoke. I noticed it even if no one else did. That dinner I mentioned earlier happened on a random Tuesday night. We were sitting around the table, eating spaghetti. Jason was talking about a job opportunity his friend had mentioned. My dad nodded along. My mom asked follow-up questions. I tried to chime in about a project I'd been working on for weeks, something I was proud of. No one responded. I repeated myself, thinking maybe they hadn't heard me. Still nothing. Jason continued talking like I hadn't spoken at all. I looked down at my plate and felt my face heat up. I stopped talking completely after that, and no one noticed. That night changed everything. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. It wasn't just about dinner. It was about years of being overlooked, minimized, treated like an afterthought. I realized I had trained everyone around me to believe my needs came last, because I had always acted like they did. The next morning, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen about finances. My dad mentioned how helpful it was that I paid rent. My mom joked that at least one of their kids was reliable. They laughed. Something inside me snapped, quietly but firmly. I didn't want praise. I wanted respect. Here's where things got complicated. I started noticing how often my time, money, and emotional energy were expected without question. If I said no, I was being difficult. If Jason messed up, it was excused. If I struggled, it was ignored. I began to wonder if they even realized what they were doing, or if this was just how things were always going to be. I didn't confront anyone right away. Instead, I started pulling back. I stopped covering extra expenses. I spent more time out of the house. I focused on my job and my own goals. That's when the comments started. I was distant. I was cold. I was changing. They weren't wrong. For the first time, I was paying attention to myself. And as uncomfortable as it felt, I knew deep down that staying silent had never protected me. It had only made me invisible. I didn't realize how much my silence had been holding everything together until I stopped filling the gaps for everyone else. The house felt different once I began setting small boundaries, even ones I didn't announce out loud. I came home later. I kept my door closed. I stopped explaining myself. My parents noticed, of course. They just didn't understand it. One evening, my mom cornered me in the hallway and asked if something was wrong. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it was impatient, like my feelings were another inconvenience to manage. I told her I was tired. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. She nodded, already halfway out of the conversation, and told me not to let work stress get to me. That was the moment I realized no one was actually listening for an answer. A week later, my dad asked if I could lend Jason some money. He needed help covering his car insurance again. I asked how much. When my dad said $400, my chest tightened. I calmly said no. The room went silent. My dad stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. My mom frowned and asked why I was being so harsh. Jason laughed under his breath and said, "Wow, guess college really changed you." I wanted to disappear, but I didn't. I explained that I was saving to move out and couldn't keep covering expenses that weren't mine. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. Jason rolled his eyes. My mom sighed. My dad said he was disappointed. That word stuck with me. Disappointed, not concerned. Not curious. Just disappointed that I wasn't playing my role anymore. That night, I cried in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel and wondering why choosing myself felt like a betrayal. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to pause for a second. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and tell me honestly if this story feels familiar to you. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. After that argument, the atmosphere at home shifted. My parents spoke to me carefully, like I was fragile or unpredictable. Jason avoided me unless he needed something, which told me everything I needed to know. I started looking at apartments in secret during my lunch breaks. I found a small one-bedroom on the north side of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. When I told my parents I planned to move out in 2 months, my mom looked hurt. My dad asked how I'd afford it. Jason didn't say anything. I told them I had it figured out. And for the first time I actually did. I had a budget. I had savings. I had a quiet confidence that scared me a little. I also had guilt, heavy and persistent, sitting in my chest. Leaving felt like I was breaking an unspoken contract. The good daughter? The reliable one? The one who didn't ask for much. But I was starting to understand something important. If I stayed, nothing would ever change. I didn't know it then, but standing my ground was setting off a chain reaction. The real confrontation was still coming, and it would force all of us to face truths we'd spent years avoiding. 2 weeks before my move, everything finally boiled over. Jason lost his job after missing too many shifts, and my parents panicked. Bills piled up. Tension filled the house. One night, my dad called a family meeting at the kitchen table. He looked directly at me and said we needed to talk about shared responsibility. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what he meant. They wanted me to stay. They wanted me to help fix what Jason had broken, again. I took a deep breath and told them I wasn't changing my plans. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. For once, I didn't apologize. And that's when my mom started crying. Seeing her tears hurt, but I also felt something new rising beneath the guilt. Resolve. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. And honesty, I was learning, can feel unbearable to people who benefit from your silence. The conversation stretched late into the night, voices rising and falling, but my decision stayed firm. When I finally went to bed, exhausted and emotionally raw, I knew there was no turning back. I fell asleep unsure of what I'd lose, but certain of one thing. I was done living a life where I didn't matter. This was only the beginning, and the hardest moments were still ahead. But I was finally ready to face them without shrinking myself. For once, I chose myself completely forward. Moving day arrived faster than I expected, and with it came a strange mix of relief and grief. I packed my car early that morning, quietly carrying boxes down the driveway while the house was still asleep. Each trip felt symbolic, like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself I'd left scattered behind. My mom eventually came outside, wrapped in her robe, holding a mug of coffee. She watched without speaking for a long moment. When she finally asked if I needed help, her voice sounded small. I told her I was okay. That answer felt honest in a way it never had before. The drive to my new apartment was short, but my mind was loud the entire way. I kept replaying the past few weeks, wondering if I'd been too harsh or selfish. Even as I unlocked the door to my new place, guilt followed me inside like an uninvited guest. The apartment was quiet, no background TV noise. No one asking favors. Just me, surrounded by half-open boxes and bare walls. I sat on the floor and cried, not because I regretted leaving, but because I finally felt how heavy everything had been. The first few weeks living alone were harder than I expected. I missed my mom's cooking. I missed the familiarity of home, even with all its flaws, but I didn't miss feeling invisible. That absence alone told me I'd made the right choice. Jason didn't reach out at all. My dad sent short texts about mail and paperwork. My mom called once a week, her tone polite and cautious. It felt like we were all learning how to exist without the old roles holding us together. Then, one afternoon, my mom showed up unannounced. She stood in my doorway looking around my small apartment like she was trying to understand who I was becoming. She asked if we could talk. I nodded and offered her the only chair I owned. She told me she'd been thinking a lot since I moved out, about how much I'd always helped, about how little she'd asked how I was doing. Hearing that cracked something open in me. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. For the first time, my mom apologized, not vaguely, not defensively. She said she hadn't realized how much pressure she'd put on me by always expecting me to be okay. She admitted it was easier to rely on me than to confront Jason. That moment didn't fix everything, but it mattered. It was the first time I felt seen. A few days later, my dad called. His tone was different too, quieter. He admitted the house felt tense without me smoothing things over. He said he hadn't realized how much emotional labor I'd been carrying. I thanked him for saying that, even though part of me wished he'd said it years earlier. Jason was the last to reach out.
He showed up one evening, standing awkwardly in my doorway, hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't apologize outright.
Instead, he said he hadn't noticed how much I'd been doing for him until I stopped. That honesty surprised me. We talked longer than we ever had before. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was real. And that was enough for now. I didn't know it then, but standing up for myself had forced everyone else to look at themselves too. Not all of them liked what they saw, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. As weeks turned into months, I grew more comfortable in my own space. I decorated slowly. I built routines that belonged only to me. I learned how to sit with discomfort without immediately fixing it for someone else. The biggest change was internal. I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was. I started asking myself what I wanted, not just what was expected. That shift was subtle but powerful. One evening, while washing dishes in my tiny kitchen, I realized something had changed for good. I felt calm, not numb, not resigned. Calm in a way that came from knowing I was allowed to take up space. Standing up for myself hadn't been easy. It had cost me comfort and certainty. But it had given me something far more valuable. Respect. From others, yes, but more importantly, from myself. I finally understood that mattering isn't something other people grant you, it's something you claim. And once you do, everything else begins to fall into place naturally. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after those conversations, but it became more honest, and that honesty changed how I showed up everywhere else. At work, I started speaking up in meetings instead of letting louder voices dominate. I asked for credit when I earned it. I stopped apologizing before stating my opinions. A few weeks later, my manager pulled me aside and told me she'd noticed the change. She said my confidence made me stand out in a good way. That comment stayed with me longer than I expected, because it mirrored what I was learning at home. When I stopped shrinking, people adjusted. My family dynamic continued to evolve, slowly and unevenly. Sunday dinners resumed, but they felt different. Jason helped more. My parents asked instead of assumed. Sometimes they slipped back into old habits, and when they did, I spoke up calmly instead of swallowing my discomfort. The first time I corrected them, my heart raced. But the world didn't end. My dad nodded. My mom paused and said she hadn't meant it that way. Small moments like that added up, teaching me that boundaries weren't attacks. They were clarity. There were still awkward silences, still guilt, still days when I questioned if I'd overreacted. But those thoughts came less often as I began trusting my own perspective. I wasn't imagining years of imbalance. I had lived it. One afternoon, my mom asked if we could take a walk together. We strolled through a nearby park, leaves crunching beneath our feet. She told me she'd started therapy. That surprised me. She said she wanted to understand why she'd leaned so heavily on me while excusing Jason's behavior. Hearing that didn't erase the past, but it softened it. Growth, I realized, doesn't always come with dramatic apologies. Sometimes it shows up as effort. Jason's journey was slower.
He struggled with consistency, but he was trying. He paid his own bills. He didn't ask me for money.
When he slipped, my parents handled it without pulling me in. That was new. That mattered. I also noticed something else changing. I no longer felt responsible for everyone's emotions. If someone was upset, I listened, but I didn't rush to fix it. That space allowed healthier conversations to happen. One night, after dinner at my parents' house, my dad walked me to my car. He thanked me for coming and then added something unexpected. He said he was proud of me for choosing myself, even when it was uncomfortable. I sat in my car afterward and cried, not from pain, but from release. Looking back, I see how deeply I'd internalized the idea that love had to be earned through sacrifice. Standing up for myself forced me to challenge that belief. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love at all. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to share in the comments where you're watching from and how you're feeling about it so far. Your experiences matter more than you think. I didn't become louder or harsher, I became clearer. That clarity rippled outward, changing my relationships, my career, and the way I spoke to myself. There were days I still missed the simplicity of being the agreeable one. It was easier in some ways. But it came at a cost I was no longer willing to pay. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't about confrontation, it's about alignment. When your actions match your values, the right people adjust, and the wrong dynamics fall apart. The fear that once kept me silent slowly lost its grip. In its place grew something steadier. Self-trust. I didn't need my family to become perfect. I needed them to see me. And when they finally did, I realized something even more important. I had seen myself first. That realization changed everything moving forward. Now, when I look back on who I was just a year ago, it feels like I'm remembering a different version of myself. Not weaker, just quieter. Someone who believed peace meant staying small and love meant endurance. I don't judge that version of me anymore. She did what she thought was necessary to survive. Life today looks simpler on the surface, but it feels fuller inside. I still live in the same apartment, though it feels warmer now, more like home. I've added plants, framed photos, little reminders that this space reflects me. I no longer rush through my days trying to keep everyone else comfortable. My relationship with my family isn't perfect, but it's real. When we talk now, I feel present instead of guarded. When something bothers me, I say it. Sometimes it's received well. Sometimes it isn't. But either way, I no longer carry the weight of unspoken resentment. Jason and I are still rebuilding trust. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We acknowledge it and move forward carefully. That honesty has created a healthier distance, one that allows us to be siblings instead of roles we were forced into. My parents still worry about me, but they also respect me. They ask about my life instead of assuming they know it. That shift alone feels like a quiet victory I once thought was impossible. At work, I was recently offered a promotion. When my manager told me, she said something that stuck. She said my growth wasn't just professional, it was personal. I walked home that day smiling, realizing how deeply connected confidence and self-respect truly are. Standing up for myself didn't turn me into someone else. It brought me back to who I always was beneath the fear of disappointing others. That realization took time, courage, and a lot of uncomfortable moments. If you're watching this and feeling that familiar ache of being overlooked, I want you to hear this clearly. Your needs are not an inconvenience. Your voice is not a problem. And choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. I used to believe that love meant staying silent to keep the peace. Now I understand that real peace comes from honesty, even when it shakes things up. Especially then. There are still days when old habits try to resurface. Moments when I feel the urge to smooth things over or apologize for existing. When that happens, I pause, I breathe. And I remind myself that I'm allowed to take up space. The biggest lesson I've learned is this. People will treat you the way you teach them to treat you. When you stop accepting less, the world adjusts, sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully. Standing up for myself wasn't easy, it cost me comfort. It forced hard conversations. It changed relationships. But it also gave me something I never had before. A sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Family should be about love, not control, support, not sacrifice. And while I can't change the past, I can choose how I move forward. I no longer measure my value by how much I give away. I measure it by how honestly I live. And that has made all the difference. If this story connected with you, I'd really love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how much you're enjoying the story. Your voice matters here too. I was treated like I didn't matter for a long time. Standing up for myself wasn't easy, but it worked. And if you're ready to try, I promise you this. It's worth it.